Well, this is another episode of the New Kind of Man podcast, and today's guest is Jason Redman. And Jason Redman is a retired Navy SEAL. He was the author of a New York Times bestseller, Trident, a fantastic book. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about his latest book, came out a few months ago, called Overcome. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Chad, thanks for having me on. Honored to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. And so you had this little note that was put on a door that went viral, and then you went from not a whole lot of people knowing you to everybody knowing you and hearing about your story. And of course, this was written down and collected in Trident, your first book, which was great. I thought that was wonderful. And the basically the thing that went on the door, just in case you've been living under a rock and you haven't heard this, I'll just read a short excerpt of it. This is what Jason wrote on a piece of paper, and it was attached to the door in the hospital before the events we're about to talk about in just a minute. He says, "Attention to all who enter here. If you are coming into this room with sorrow or feel sorry for my wounds, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got in a job I love, doing it for people that I love, supporting the freedom of country that I deeply love. I'm incredibly tough and will make a full recovery. What is full? This is the absolute utmost physically my body has the ability to recover." And then you say some other amazing things there as well. But you are that man. And I just want to say that was a very compelling story, and not story in some cliche way, but this is your life. Thank you for sharing it, and thank you for your service.
My honor, man. And it's just kind of interesting. I mean, you never know. I talk often about this. You never know the impact of choosing positivity in the face of negativity. Mm-hmm. It is such a powerful thing, and it is a hard thing because it goes against everything that makes us human. I mean, when we're going through incredibly hard times, when we're in pain, when we're suffered whatever kind of trauma we go through, there's a natural tendency to want to turn inward. I mean, it's just how we are. And it's really hard to push yourself outward, especially push positivity in the face of that. And that's really what that sign represents. And I am fortunate enough that in doing that, really is kind of a proclamation of, hey, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself, so I'm not going to let anybody else feel sorry for me. The ripple effects that went out and now have impacted millions and millions of people. It has been amazing throughout the years, all the people that have reached out to me, individuals that have been in the hospital from accidents, or, I've had a lot of people that have been in the hospital for cancer. I had an individual that his wife and son were in a horrific accident and devastatingly injured. All the way to, obviously, Secretary Gates and First Lady Michelle Obama writing about that sign in their book. So it has been really amazing, an amazing journey to watch the impact of that sign and to be able to tell other people, man, hey, you have that ability too. It's just a choice. It is a choice to choose positivity in the face of negativity.
Yeah, right on. And it means so much coming from you than it would be someone who, like me, who hasn't actually endured that. And I'm especially thankful that this message has gone out to a bunch of our fellow soldiers, sailors, and Marines and airmen who've been injured in battle, and the wounded warriors, and how they've been inspired by your story too. And I know that, every time I tell it and every time that I read it, I'm encouraged, and I'm sure that that's the continual ripple effect that that people are feeling as well.
Yeah, it is neat because the actual sign, I don't own it anymore.
Really?
I didn't feel like it was mine. I felt like when I wrote it, and the momentum that it got within the Wounded Warrior community, that it really belonged to the Wounded Warriors, and it was the mindset, and it was born there in the Wounded Ward at Bethesda Naval Hospital, which now has become Walter Reed National Medical Center. Mm-hmm. So when I got invited to the White House to meet President Bush, I asked him to sign it. And then we had it framed in this really nice big frame. We put in all 4 service medals. Up at the top, we put the Purple Heart, and then the Afghanistan and the Iraq campaign medals. And wrote a message. I wrote a message to the doctors and nurses for the amazing job they do to put us back together. And the other message was to the future Wounded Warriors who would read this sign.
Mm.
that, you control your destiny, and it is going to be a new path, and it's going to be a really hard path, but you have the ability to do that. So, and we gave it to the hospital. So the sign was dedicated, and it hangs right in the middle of the wounded ward at Walter Reed. And it's been amazing. I mean, to this day, I still have wounded warriors that'll reach out to me and say, "Hey, I just want to thank you. Your sign really motivated me," or family members who,
Mhm.
um, while they were in the hospital, they would read the sign and it gave them hope and inspired them. So it's been very neat, but that's where it lives, where it
Mm.
should.
So let's go back to 2007 and what happened in Iraq that actually led you to that hospital bed and then to writing that sign for the world to see. What happened? And as we kind of now make a little pivot into overcome and talking about the X that you found yourself on.
Yeah. So, a very action packed combat deployment in Iraq in 2007. It was my second combat deployment, coming off the first combat deployment in Afghanistan in 2005, where I got myself in a little bit of trouble, a few leadership, just some poor leadership decisions. And that really, I won't get into the details. I'll just say that it was a big growth time in my life where I had to fix some internal issues,
Mhm.
really come to grow up to be a leader, and had figured a lot of that stuff out, and was really shining and gotten my career back on track in Iraq.
Mhm.
And was right at the very end of our deployment. We were literally 1 week from sending our first wave of guys home. I was getting ready to lead that deployment, and I was screening for the next level SEAL team or stepping into the next level of leadership. So, I mean, everything was really clicking. And got the word that an individual we had been tracking all of deployment, the number one Al Qaeda leader in the Anbar province, was going to be in a specific location, something we call a time sensitive target.
Mhm.
And we geared up. My team launched on that target. Often happens in war and when you're dealing with time sensitive things, we arrived just a little too late. We could tell there were signs somebody had been there, but he wasn't there. We found some indicators. We found explosives and IED making components, and my team was going to blow that up. And we were going to call it a night. It was about 3 a.m. at this point, and we really thought that, as often happens, I mean, sometimes you get the enemy and sometimes you just don't. And we
Mhm.
thought it was going to be a quiet night. And my team, the assault team that took down the initial target, was kind of stood down waiting for our external security team and our explosive ordnance guys to detonate that stuff, and we were going to get out of there. Our sniper saw a bunch of activity on another house about 150 yards away to the north. And my boss, the ground force commander, came up to me and said, "Hey, let's take your team. We just saw 5 guys run out of this house up there, and they ran and hid in some brush across the street. Let's go question them." Because and in Iraq, uh, most people do not come out of there. There was a curfew, and most people don't come out of their house late at night, especially after black helicopters and explosions occur, unless they're not good. And if
Mhm.
they're running to hide, usually they're hiding information or something. So I took my team, and to make a long story short, we walked into a very well executed Al Qaeda ambush. That leader was in that house about 150 yards away. He had a large security detail. We estimate anywhere from 12 to 15 individuals. They had pre-staged an ambush line in that vegetation. So those 5 individuals that our sniper saw leave the house were the last part of his security detail.
Mhm.
And my team and I walked right into their ambush. So 2 PKM machine guns, which is a large belt-fed machine gun, shoots a bullet about the size of my thumb, and then multiple AK-47 shooters. And there we were a 6-man team, 5 SEALs and 1 interpreter, and 3 out of the 6 of us were initially hit in the volley of fire.
Wow.
Um, uh, just amazing job by my teammates. One of our guys who later earned the Silver Star for running forward and grabbing our medic and pulling him back to the only point of cover we had, which was like a large um, John Deere size style tractor tire. Other than that, it was like thousands of yards of empty Iraqi desert. So my team fell back to that. I was initially trying to lay down fire while this was happening, and then I got stitched across the body. I took rounds across the body armor, and I took 2 rounds in the left elbow, which in the moment I thought had shot my arm off. I was taking rounds off my gun, rounds off my helmet. And then I turned to try and move back to that tire, to move back to where my guys were, when I caught a round from behind in the face. It hit me right in front of the ear, traveled through my cheek and right under my eye, exited the right side of my nose, taken off most of my nose, broke all the bones above my eye, vaporized my orbital floor. My eye dropped into this newfound hole in my face. It broke my cheekbone and kicked what was left of it out to the right. It broke the head of my jaw, and it shattered my jaw to my chin, and then knocked me out on the ground in front of my guys, which they proceeded to have a very intense firefight with the enemy fighters at this point, and literally directly over me. When I came to, I was laying on my back, literally watching tracer fire travel about 8 inches above me in this very intense firefight. And we have a saying in special operations, the point of any incident, any ambush, any attack, we call it the X. And I had learned throughout my special operations career that if you want to survive any attack, you have to get off the X as quickly as possible. The inverse, we try to put the enemy on the X, and we want to pin them on the X as long as possible to either kill or incapacitate them or kill their will to fight. And I remember laying there in that moment thinking to myself, man, we got to get off this X. But unfortunately, there was really nothing I could do. I was pinned down. I was really mangled, and I had to rely on my guys to get me off the X. And I remember thinking in those first few moments, oh my God, you know, I'm really messed up. I'm losing a ton of blood. There's nothing I can control. There's nothing I can do. And those are natural feelings when we're in some kind of massively overwhelming situation, no different than what a lot of people are going through right now, or anytime somebody goes through a major crisis or, catastrophic event in their life. And I kind of took a breath, and I realized, okay, let's revert back to our training. You know, what do we know? You know, there's immediate action drills that we can do. And number 2, we have to control what we can. And 3, I don't care how dire or bleak the situation looks, there's always some piece of positive within the negative. Within any storm, somewhere out there beyond the storm itself, the sun still shines, and we have to look to that. How do we move to that? And those were the things that I thought about in that moment. And thankfully, to make a long story short, my teammates fought back. We called in a fire mission from an AC-130 gunship up above, the closest fire mission in the history in the entire Iraq war. We literally called fire directly on our position, and a tribute to both my team leader, who later also earned the Silver Star, who I feel like he should have got a Navy Cross, but he earned a Silver Star, and the air crew of that AC-130 gunship, who all the main players on that gunship earned distinguished flying crosses, and the rest of the crew earned air medals that night, and rightfully so, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them and my teammates. Fast forward 12 years, and let's go back to the very beginning, that overwhelming moment. I realized in this idea of getting off the X, I realized working with so many wounded warriors in the years I ran my nonprofit, and then getting into the business side of working with businesses and individuals who are struggling through crisis, change, failure, whatever it is, that people feel exactly the same way I felt in that ambush. They feel overwhelmed. They feel like things are beyond their control. They feel like there's nothing I can do. They feel like there's no hope. And I realized that even though it was actual enemy bullets and bombs that were striking me, in life, when you're going through a traumatic event, you're feeling the bullets and bombs of life. Right now, you're feeling the bullets and bombs of this pandemic. I mean, there's so many people that are being hit by it, but the principles are the same. And if you can build your mind around this, I have to immediately get off the X, and I got to start figuring out how to do that. you will not just survive the incident you're in, but you will thrive from it. And that really became the basis of everything that the book Overcome is written on.
So the X is the point of ambush for you in a literal sense. And what you're saying is that we in life will face all sorts of life ambushes. And you said, even I believe in the book, that you say that the average number of life ambushes that people will face is 5. So, and say that number is, it is average, means that some of us are going to take a lot more. And when I read that, I was like, dude, you're way off, because I'm like at 10, I think. I don't think I'm at 5. Maybe I'm the anomaly, that I'm making it some easier for somebody else. I guess that's fine. But you talk about getting off the X, and again, in literal sense, you had to in the middle of this life adversity. I just want to read this quote from the book, because I think it's powerful and it tees up where we're going. You say that adversity can often catch you by surprise and leave you struggling with what to do next. What if you could confront any adversity, from the biggest challenges, the loss of your job, divorce, health issues, bankruptcy, to normal daily challenges, a late flight, a disappointing phone call, a missed promotion, a bad day, and not just survive it, but thrive afterwards? So that's really the core of this book. And of course, you being a retired Navy SEAL, you mix in a lot of great stories from people who I just consider giants in special ops, but yet this is very practical for someone who just wants to read it to maybe to learn how to endure and to gain the right mindset to move forward in life. So I really appreciated that. Another thing I appreciated in your book is you said that you feel like you have beat the odds all of your life. Like you always, when I read that, it was almost like you were treating yourself as you had to overcome like all part of your life, like almost like the certain things were just either stacked against you. And I think one of the things you say, you're a skinny high schooler, maybe even undersized when you went into buds. Why did you say that? Why did you say specifically that you feel like you've had to beat the odds all of your life? Because I think this gives credibility into what happened on that day when you were on the X.
Yeah, I mean, for a number of reasons. One, I would just say that I'm I think a lot of people, when they think of SEALs, which isn't necessarily the reality, a lot of people think of these big, like Arnold Schwarzenegger type individuals, which isn't really true. I mean, the average SEAL is about 5'10", 180. But I'm not even that. I'm on the smaller end of the spectrum. I'm 5'8", and probably in the SEAL teams, I average around 165, which I now am between 165 and 170 is the average of where I fall.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line, I don't fall into the normal spectrum. When I went through SEAL training, I was 135 pounds. During Hell Week, I dropped to 117, I believe. I lost a bunch of weight during Hell Week. So needless to say, and I was just no body fat whatsoever. So I just froze my butt off. Thankfully, thank God, I was not naturally prone to hyperthermia like some people are. And I was able to get through training. But the bottom line is, I wasn't the average kid. I wasn't this average individual or body type that would become a SEAL. I wasn't this star athlete. I wasn't this genetically gifted kid who had all these amazing capabilities. I was just somebody that kind of ground through and figured it out. I wasn't naturally a leader. I had to work hard at that. Obviously, I almost failed at that. And that whole story is in the book that tried it. I sometimes joke, but I do feel it's a little true. I'm incredibly stubborn. So that stubbornness is both a gift and it's also a curse, because I can be a really slow learner. I mean, people can tell me, hey, if you do this, it's not going to work out that well. And sometimes I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to figure it out on my own. And then I'll grind through the absolute pain and misery of doing exactly what they told me was not going to work. And I'll get to the other side and I'll be like, wow, you know what? You were right. I should have listened. My friends used to joke, there was the easy way, the hard way, and then there's Jay Redman's way. So I would just say that I beat the odds a lot of times. I beat the odds that night on the battlefield. I lost a ton of blood. Doctors were amazed I survived from the amount of blood I lost. there's just been amazing moments in my life where I've been given these incredible opportunities to beat the odds. And some of it was fate or God. And some of it was just sheer willpower to keep driving forward and stay off that X and keep grinding forward. And I really do believe, and I tell people that the recipe for success, I mean, you can be incredibly smart and creative, and you can build the best teams and you can have the best plans. But at the end of the day, it will all go wrong at some point. Yeah. It is guaranteed. And that is what a life ambush is. It is this unexpected tornado, hurricane, earthquake, bomb, accident that goes off in your life that just totally floors you. And it is those critical moments that the difference between people who are successful and people who fail or fall is the individuals who are willing to get back up and drive forward and keep grinding and keep saying, I don't care what happened, I'm just going to move forward. It may not be the outcome that I thought it was going to be, but I'm going to keep driving forward. And that is the single most critical thing that has enabled my success. But it has not come without a lot of hardship, a lot of very hard times in my life. Sometimes some knuckleheaded times where I look back at myself and go, gosh, you're dumb. Why didn't you listen to them the first time instead of really grinding through this? And I'm getting smarter as I get older with that. But the bottom line, we're coming full circle, Chad. I don't care who you are. You know, don't look at me as like, oh, you're a Navy SEAL, you're able to do this. Everything I write about in the book they are human principles.
Absolutely.
And the overcome mindset is not a SEAL mindset. It's a human mindset. And it is a willingness to choose positivity over negativity. And it is a willingness to get up when these bad moments happen and crawl your way forward. And sometimes it literally is like a nanometer at a time. But guess what? You're still moving forward. And forward progress creates momentum and inertia. And the more you get to move forward, this is one of the biggest things I try and tell people. Movement is life. So it's never too late. It's never too late to be able to get up and start building that momentum and get off that X and find success.
Yeah, you talk about this word react, and you make it an acrostic. And the acrostic is to get off the X, is to recognize your reality, evaluate your position, assess possible exit routes, choose a direction and communicate it, and then take action. So how would a guy do that? Maybe there's a guy who's listening, and that's really my audience is just guys, you know, maybe a guy who's younger than us. I think we're about the same age. And, you know, so this guy is maybe around 30. He's got a child and, you know, married, maybe not married, got a child, made some mistakes. And maybe he does, you know, we're trying to give him something better than what we have. It sounds like for you and I, many times for us to learn a lesson, it's a 2x4. And it's like, where did that come from? You know? And it's like, so we're trying to spare this guy the 2x4. How would you inspire or maybe encourage this guy to get off his X when he feels stuck in life?
And that's why we made the REACT methodology. I mean, it is a process to deal with any crisis. And the great news, it works. You know, I've worked with so many people that have been through trauma or businesses that are going through some kind of crisis, failure, or change. And the REACT methodology works. So you talked about the different steps. It is just taking that time to analyze the situation you're in. Life ambushes come in different forms. I talk about there's the great, big, huge, catastrophic ones. These are the ones that I talk about. You're going to average about 5 in your lifetime. And these at the lower end of the spectrum can be the ending of a relationship. It could be a divorce. It could be business failure. It could be a lawsuit. And, you know, it moves up to life-threatening illness or injury to you or someone you love. It could be sexual trauma to you or someone you love. It could be the unexpected loss of a loved one. And one of the bigger impacts I've seen is the loss of a child. Those are major life ambushes. The second tier I call minor life ambushes. And these are what I describe as something bad has happened to you, but it isn't so bad that it will, let me go back to majors. Majors will forever leave physical, mental, and emotional scars on you, forever. Okay. You'll never fully recover from them. You'll always carry those scars with you. You learn to deal with them. You learn to get stronger from them, but you don't ever fully recover them. You carry them with you. that second tier of the minor life ambush, something bad has happened to you, but it's not going to leave physical, mental, or emotional scars. I like to describe it as a schedule disruption. It's something, a perfect example is you're a 1-car family and suddenly that car breaks down. Well, that creates massive impact on you and your spouse and potentially kids. You're having to rely on other people. You're having to rely on public transportation. You're having to deal with this impact on your life, only having 1 car that now doesn't work. But the reality is, fast forward a few years, and if I was to say, hey, Chad, do you remember when your car broke down and you were catching a ride with me for a month while I was getting fixed? And you'd be like, oh, yeah, I remember that. But I know so many people that allow that to just negatively pin them to the X. And it impacts every decision they make and everything they do in this negative way. And the last one is something I call micro ambushes. These are the ambushes of the mind. And I'll be honest, they can be the most deadly because these are the ambushes that stop most people from being successful. They're the ambushes that say, you're too small, you're not fast enough, you're not strong enough, you're the wrong race, creed, color, sex, you don't come from the right background to be able to do that or do this or whatever. And there's so many people that listen to those things. They get stuck on that X. So react is a process to be able to get yourself off the X, whether it's a major all the way down to the micro. And the very first step, like you talked about, you have to recognize you're on the X in any capacity, because as human beings, we have a natural tendency to nobody wants to admit they've got a problem. Right. And we have a natural tendency to kind of be in denial as we're going through it.
And so guys can be the worst, right? I mean, guys just struggle.
Guys and leaders together are the worst, because individuals, leaders feel like, hey, I'm a leader. I can't admit I have a problem. I've got to put on this strong face, and I don't want to admit to others. So leaders of families or leaders of businesses, we're really bad about this. When it's really the exact opposite. You need to recognize as quickly as possible that, Houston, we have a problem. And you need to articulate it to others around you, because, the thing is, you're never on the X alone. When life ambushes come along, whether it's a personal ambush, whether it's a physical ambush, or it's a professional ambush, the other people around you get pulled onto the X with you. Number 2, you got to evaluate your assets and inventory. So when you're in the recognition phase and you're initially on the X, this is where it's the most dire. This is where we feel that there's no hope. There's nothing I can do. It's all beyond my control. And this is where it's the most critical to say, hey, we have a problem, and this is what it is. This is the crisis. And this is where we go from there's no hope to there's hope. And the way we do that is we evaluate our assets and inventory of things we have around us. That may be people. It may be relationships. It may be money in the bank. It may be doctors, counselors, priests, lawyers. It doesn't matter. We evaluate it. Perfect example. When I was laying there bleeding out in that gunfight, and I realized, man, I'm combat ineffective. I am out of this fight, and I've just got to be patient. But even though I knew that, I still started going through the process of, okay, we're in a bad situation, recognize, evaluate assets and inventory. I started thinking about, okay, what do we have to bring to bear on this problem? And I started thinking about all the different assets we had. I knew we had a Marine Corps Quick Reaction Force not that far away. I knew we had drones up overhead. I knew we had Army 160th medevac helicopters on standby. I knew we had the gunship overhead. I knew my other team was about 150 yards away. All of that gave me hope, because I knew, hey, man, this is a bad situation, but we actually have tools in our toolbox to deal with this problem. And that's one of the most critical things. So whether it's a micro ambush of your mind, when we start to evaluate the real tools we have around us, it suddenly starts to give us a little hope. Number 3 is, you've got to assess possible options and outcomes. So now that we know what tools we have, well, now we start to develop plans. And we really start to look at how do we implement this in the long-term outcome. 4 is you got to choose and communicate. So remember when I talked about we're never on the X alone? And 2 things happen, specifically when you are a leader. And there's a natural tendency when you go through the first 3 steps, so recognize, evaluate, and we choose a direction, is before we articulate it, there's a natural tendency to, especially in a bad situation, to second guess our decision process. Yeah, option A really seems like the best way, but you know what? Maybe option B, but my team said option C, but I don't know if that's true. And as a leader, we'll sit there and just go round and round. It's critical to just choose one and communicate it, because by doing this, you accomplish two things. Number one, it establishes a level of accountability. As humans and as leaders, until it comes out of our mouth and we tell people we're going to do it, it doesn't really exist. It only exists as a thought in your head. It isn't until you voice it that it suddenly becomes an actionable item. And as a leader, when we voice something, there is a level of expectation for the people around us for us to do it. So it gives us accountability. Two, man, people are waiting. In a crisis, people are waiting for someone to lead them. They're so hungry for direction to get out of this uncomfortable situation that it's critical when someone, or it's absolutely hopeful when somebody says, all right, guys, here's what's happening. We're going to go this way and this is how we're going to do it. People are like, oh my God, he just gave us a direction. Let's go. And it's a confidence builder for the leader, and it allows you to go. Now, who knows? You may move from one X to the next in a major crisis. That's okay. Remember we talked about momentum and inertia? It's easier to move from one X to the next than it is to sit there on an X forever. It's like quicksand. It'll continue to pull you down. It gets harder and harder to get up. And then that last one, you have to take action. Whether it's a micro, a mini, or a major life ambush, you have to take action. You have to get up and get off that X. If you are stuck in your mind of negativity that you're not good enough to do something, or you're afraid to get out and try something, get up, take action. Just go do something to change that mindset. Or if you're on a major life ambush, whatever catastrophic situation you're in, go through that process and take action. So many people wait for the perfect moment. They're like, okay, we're I'll use the battlefield analogy. We're taking bullets and bombs are going off. So we're going to wait until all that stops. Well, that may never happen. If you have a very well-trained force, you may be waiting for your death. They may be flanking you, whatever it is. So really, the time is now. There's never going to be a perfect moment in life to execute. So once you've developed that plan, you've gone through that process, take action. That movement is life. The individuals who get off the fastest are the ones who don't just survive. It's like we talked about at the beginning. They're the ones who thrive.
Excellent. Yeah. And, when you were going through those, that is the word, the word that came to mind was hope. And you said that word early on. I mean, that's what this is. It's hope. You recognize your reality. So now we don't have to just stick our head in the sand or drink our way to an oblivion just to ignore our reality or try and cope with it. We don't have to just settle in ourselves and just, okay, now, I recognize my reality. Now life sucks. I'm stuck. No, you evaluate your positions. Yeah, I'm currently stuck. And then, I'm on an X. So now what do I do? Okay, here, I could do this. I could do this. I could do this. Choose a direction based off of the intel that you have, and then take the action. It's always easier to pivot to a new thing than it is to start a new thing.
Yep.
So, man, if you're stuck and, as Jay just went through those 5 different principles, like just pick a direction and start moving in it. Sure, you may have to tweak it along the way. In a business, maybe you're stuck in a business venture right now and you're like, I just don't know what to do. Make a decision. By not making a decision, you're leading yourself and others to despair. You're going to be hopeful just if you can move forward and then pivot as you need to.
Absolutely.
One of the things you talk about in the book is a pivot actually in your life. And you mentioned this just a little bit ago. So if it's sensitive, we don't need to dig too deep into it, but I thought that it was interesting enough to have you tell this story. You talked about how you were having some leadership failures and you'd actually gotten a reprimand for it. And
go ahead. Sorry.
And that through that, that you were kind of in a bad headspace, and then they sent you to Ranger School, which is kind of like, to me, I when I read it, I laughed. I was like, okay, so Ranger School is punishment. I'm like, all right, so I understand. I mean, when I was young, I went into the Navy. When I was young, I wanted to be an airborne ranger. That's what I wanted to do. So I was like, come on, man, you had an opportunity here. But anyway, so so what were the failures in leadership? And also this, how did the React methodology help you out in that?
No, great questions. And no, I'm fully transparent. I talk all about, I think it's important to talk about our failures, but people are really uncomfortable to do that. People don't want to admit they failed. And don't get me wrong, I hate failure.
Yeah.
I have to really work hard to lean into failure. I talked about this on one of my Monday musters a couple weeks ago, was this push-up challenge that Ray was challenging me to. I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't there yet. I mean, 1,020 push-ups in an hour. But I finally just said, man, you got to do this. It doesn't matter if you fail, failure makes us better. So I talk all about my failures. And in this case, I had failed as a leader. And really what it was is often happens with young leaders, more so males. I don't see this quite as often in female leaders, but we get a little enamored with our capabilities. And as we start having successes when we're younger, we start to think a little higher of our leadership abilities than they really are. And the reality is, I don't care who you are, you're usually not quite as good as you think you are.
That's right.
And if you can maintain a little of humility, be that selfless servant leader, it is amazing how far that'll take you. And I lost sight of that. I was doing very well as a young enlisted SEAL and got recommended for a commission and graduated with very high honors in the ROTC program that I went through, and then came back to the SEAL teams thinking I was like God's gift to leadership, like I was going to be, I don't know, Patton or something. And there were I kind of stepped into my own perfect storm. One of the things that occurred while I was gone was 9/11 had happened while I was gone. So we went from a peacetime military to a wartime military. We went from a military unit, specifically the SEAL teams, where we probably in 2001, prior to 9/11, probably only about 5% of the SEAL teams had any level of combat experience.
Wow.
And then suddenly within a 2-year, 3-year period, almost 100% of the SEAL teams had combat experience. So when I came back in 2004 as a newly commissioned officer, I suddenly was leading a whole group of guys that had combat experience, and I didn't. Not only did I not, the other thing that occurred, all our tactics changed overnight. We quickly learned that we had been operating off old Vietnam era tactics, because that was the last time the SEAL teams had seen long sustained combat. And we quickly realized that the Vietnam era tactics we were using didn't work in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so those couple of things, I stepped back, and here I was thinking, man, I'm a prior enlisted guy, I'm going to kill it. I wasn't. I was behind the power curve, big time. And a lot of the tactics that I had learned when I was a young enlisted guy were no longer being used. So not only am I trying to become a leader, a good leader, I'm also trying to learn all these new tactics. And instead of humbling myself and saying, you know what, guys, I don't know how to do this. I really could use your help. These are all new things to me. I didn't. Ego and arrogance are very dangerous allies as a leader. Yeah. And you need to swallow your pride. And I think sometimes leaders make the mistake of thinking that if I admit I don't know how to do something, it's a sign of weakness in leadership. And it's not. It's, if you really are a great leader, you're going to surround yourself with people who are better than you and know things that you don't know. And if you are honest with them and you're willing to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, but that's why I have you. Would you be willing to teach me so that I can become smarter on it and be better? You're the subject matter expert, so you're going to be the one that's going to do this, but I really want to understand how it's done. I wasn't willing to do that. So I was literally stepping on my toes and slowly damaging my credibility as a leader. Well, now add the denial phase. I was in a crisis. Here's the reality. And I had not developed the React methodology. I'll be honest, the React methodology didn't get developed until I wrote Overcome.
Okay.
But I was in a crisis, and I was just too blind and arrogant to see it. So what do we do when we're in a crisis? Well, we try and numb the pain. And that's exactly what I started doing. I started drinking more and more until it was to the point I was going out almost every night with the young enlisted guys and literally drinking myself into a stupor, which now, okay, so you're struggling with the tactics we're using, and now you're a drunk. These two things were really eroding my leadership credibility. Fast forward to we deployed to Afghanistan, and we were on a mission in September of 2005 where I was in an overwatch position, and guys, we were sweeping through a valley. Guys down in the valley got into a big firefight. I made the pretty much the unilateral decision to go down and support them with a machine gunner. And it was a very bad call. And thankfully, we managed to go down and get out of that valley without anything happen. But it did delay air support for about 30 minutes. And I'll be honest, I mean, the thing that it did damage was my professional reputation. It was kind of the last nail in the coffin between the training issues and between the drinking and then that final thing. Mm-hmm. There were guys that were like, hey, get rid of that guy. He's dangerous. And instead of owning it, and I think this is one of the biggest things as a leader, when you mess up, you need to quickly do an assessment and come to understand, hey, I messed that up and I own it. Let me figure out how to fix it and drive forward, and I didn't. I fought against it. And I said, man, you guys are throwing me under the bus. I'm the victim here. And that led down this very hard road of coming very close to being kicked out of the Navy and losing my trident, to walking this very hard redemption path, if you will, of getting sent to Ranger School and really taking a couple of years to earn back the trust and credibility and respect of my teammates. It was the hardest road I've ever walked. The good news was, I think God works in interesting ways, because when I got wounded, a few years later, after all that had happened, I was like, you know what? I've been through worse. I mean, this leadership journey I walked is the hardest journey I've ever been through. And a lot of people think that. They'll say to me, oh man, you being wounded must be the hardest thing you went through. Man. It was that failure as a leadership and really working my way back up. So when I was wounded, I said, you know what? I've been through worse. We're going to drive forward. We're going to get off this X. And it was no different than what I did in that leadership journey. You take one step at a time. You just keep moving. And that over time was really how the REACT methodology developed, how this idea of getting off the X, this idea of how we lead ourselves with the 3 rules of leadership, all this started to form based off the things I had done in my life to move me forward out of these crisis situations.
Well, and that's the best thing, right? You write about what you've lived about. And so, I mean, that just adds into the credibility of an author when you write a book and it's from personal experience. It's just deeper. I mean, it sounds to me, Jay, like this was in your bones. I mean, I know that even the transition, which there's another thing I laughed at in the book. I know that you qualified for when we were in the service, there was the Seaman to Admiral program. And I remember they were talking about that, and I hadn't gone to college until after I got out of the Navy. But I remember reading about that, and I'm like, yeah, right. Nobody does that. No one. This is like some, Pentagon, Washington, D.C., somebody's marketing the military. Like, this is just a hoax. This isn't real. And then I read it, and I was like, oh, Jason Redman did it. That was just part of his story. So, and you were a SEAL for 11 years, right? Before you went and then ended up getting your commission, going to Old Dominion, and then completing a bachelor's, and then
eight years. 8 years I was an active duty SEAL, and then for 3 years I went to school. So I was still an active duty SEAL. That's kind of the way the Seaman to Admiral program worked. They actually sent you to school on active duty. So I was at school. So I was an E6, still a SEAL, but going to school. That was my job. And we would go back and we would do some of our qualifications. I stayed in the area when I went to school. So we'd go back and jump and dive and shoot to keep our quals up. But, other than that, my job was to go to school. So by the time I got commissioned, I had 11 years of enlisted service.
Yeah. And I could totally see, it's a whole different rationale. And for you listeners, you hear Seaman to Admiral, you're like, what does that even mean? It means going from enlisted to lower, just the lowest enlisted to an admiral, which is the highest as far as a commissioned officer. They're the ones who are in charge. So that is a drastic change. And I can see how, somebody's ego coming out of that, and you had already been a SEAL, and now I'm going to go back and kind of show the guys how it's done. And now I'm not that guy anymore. No, I've just made it through this made it through college and now I'm a commissioned officer, I see how the ego can really get out of control. But isn't that what happens with leaders?
It does. I mean, some are better than others. I mean, a lot of people talk to me about leadership and they'll say to me, well, I'm not a leader, or I'm not a natural leader, or anything like that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't really believe anybody is. I will say this, that some people naturally have personality traits that lead them to be better leaders. I'll
Hmm.
just say that there are certain personality traits that make it easier to lead people.
Hmm.
Um, like I have I don't know if I want to call it a personality flaw, but I just have a personality trait. I run hot. I
Hmm.
can get angry very easy. The flip side of that coin, I also get excited very easy. So I
Hmm.
run this, but those aren't really good traits in a leader. Those are things a leader wants to
Hmm.
be more even keeled. You don't want to be flying off the handle with anger when things go wrong. And you don't also want to be this, uh, jubilant idiot when things
Hmm.
are going great. You want to be able to be consistent in your leadership. So those are things I really have to work with. And it took me years to really manage that and understand myself. The bottom line is this: leadership is a learned thing.
Yeah.
Anyone can learn to be a good leader. It just takes coming to understand yourself, understanding your strengths, understanding your weaknesses, and really recognizing, how do I amplify my strengths and how do I manage my weaknesses?
Hmm.
And that's really what leads to being a good leader.
Yeah, we could go a bunch of different directions with this, and but I'm just going to kind of go in one vein. You talked about leadership, specifically self-leadership, and in the book you talk about the Pentagon of peak performance, and you talk about leadership in these 5 different areas. And I was really interested in these 5 because they're actually a big part of the pillars of my work. So in the 5 different parts of the Pentagon of peak performance, it's a lot of P's, man, a lot of P's. It's
Phonetic,
yeah,
phonetic.
yeah, it's true. Is physical leadership, mental leadership, emotional leadership, social leadership, and then spiritual leadership. So, why did you settle upon these 5? And how do you grow in these?
So I settled on these 5 for a reason. It was a little bit of when I wrote the Trident. So the Trident came out in 2013. Overcome didn't come out till 2019.
Hmm.
People that read the Trident would reach out to me and say, "Oh my God, I loved your story, but how did you do that?" The Trident would get into the action steps. It really just told my story. It is a memoir, and there's lots of leadership lessons in it. But what
Hmm.
was missing was the step-by-step process for people to implement that in their life. And I'll be honest, people would write me or I would speak and they'd say, well, Jay, how do you create an overcome mindset? Or Jay, how do
Hmm.
you really become a better leader? How do you deal with this or deal with that? And I could explain it in vague terms, but I had not really developed a step-by-step process. So it was over those 6 years that I was just writing and really kind of developing some of these concepts and ideas. And I was thinking about, okay, the crises, the life ambushes that I've been in my life, why did I launch out of my grievous injury that everybody would say, oh my God, that must be the hardest thing you ever went through? Why
Hmm.
did I launch out of that? But some other lesser ambushes I kind of struggled out
Hmm.
of, like the leadership failure. The reality is that leadership failure took me about almost 6 months before I finally did it and started to move forward and grow from it.
Hmm.
I sat on it for a long time. And it made me look at myself and say, okay, what traits or what parts of you played into this?
Hmm.
And that's how we started to fall onto this idea, these 5 key areas of leadership, because I realized I was incredibly strong in the 5 areas that we designated after I was wounded. But I had allowed some of those areas to slip in other aspects of my life and some of the other ambushes, and a business ambush I went through, and also in the leadership failure.
Hmm.
So those 5 areas, like you talked about, are our physical leadership. So taking care of our bodies. And this is one of the most critical things. It is the baseline. It is the foundation. And I try to explain this to people because it's the inverse. As we get older, we stop taking care of ourselves. Um, it becomes less of a priority because it comes down to time. We think it's not as important. We're focused on
Right.
family. We're focused on bringing in money. We're focused
Hmm.
on all these different, being a good dad or mom or brother or sister or whatever it is. And taking care of our body becomes less on the equation. It seems like when we're younger, we do it because we want to look good and we're attracting a mate. But you know, what's interesting about that is we get older, it's even more critical to take care of ourselves. Because when the body is strong, we handle stress better, we handle crisis better, we feel better, you can operate better, you have higher energy levels, all critical things you need as a leader. And so I talk to people about this now, that you've got to have that foundational level. So fitness, nutrition, and sleep, those key things. And we could get deep into the weeds on that. Mental leadership is your ability to constantly be seeking out knowledge. Let me go back for 1 second. On physical leadership, what I realized, I'm still alive because my physical leadership I was probably in the best shape of my life when I got wounded. From the amount of blood I lost, I had been training for our next level of SEAL team, and doctors told me, they said, your fitness saved your life. You know, the amount of blood you lost, you probably would have died, but your body was able to handle this massive shock that most other people couldn't have handled. So literally my fitness saved my life when I was wounded. And hopefully, you know, the rest of you won't ever be out in a situation where that's the case, but it will definitely help you with the stress and all these things. And especially in this day and age where our diets are terrible, our sleep cycles are terrible. You know, strokes are on the rise. I write about this in the book that here in, I think, 5 years, 1 in 3 Americans will be type 2 diabetics.
Yeah.
Man, that is and mainly that has to do with diet and lifestyle. You can change that.
Yep.
You can change that. So number 2 is mental leadership. When I got myself in trouble, I had failed as a leader, and that's a painful thing to accept. I mean, it was very humbling when we came off that deployment, and you know, in the SEAL teams, rank has a place, but really the guys, the you know, if you will, to give them an endearing term, the sled dogs, man, the pipe hitters, they're the ones that really choose who they want to work with, because they're the guys that are going in and kicking down those doors. So they want to know that the leaders they work with are good and they trust them and respect them. So oftentimes they will submit, hey, this is who I'd like to work with. I want to be in this person's platoon. And they basically wrote, hey, no matter what, we don't want to work with that guy. You talk about a blow to your ego, you know, when all that was occurring. So it made me say, wow, you've got some work to do. After I finished Ranger School and finally started to wake up. So I started reading every book I could find on leadership. I just got this insatiable quest for knowledge. And that's really the heart and soul of mental leadership. It is constantly seeking out knowledge. It's challenging your beliefs. It's challenging your understanding of yourself. It's accepting this idea that you are not as great as you think you are. So we should always be trying to grow and be better, that your leadership journey and your education journey never ends. It's identifying mentors around you that can help you. It's being humble enough to say, hey, I don't know the answer to that, so let me go figure it out, or at least ask somebody. So my mental leadership was incredibly strong when I was wounded. Number 3 is emotional leadership. Your ability to deal with crisis and tragedy and negativity. I had been through it, and I knew from my journey, walking that path and dealing with a lot of negativity, that choosing positivity in the face of negativity will make all the difference in the world. And I just chose to do that. And now I just talk to people about this. The power of that is so strong. If you want to hear a good talk that builds into the basis of that, go watch my TED Talk, How to Overcome Hard Times. It is all around choosing positivity in the face of negativity. Number 4 is social leadership. What rings of people do you surround yourself with? Do you surround yourself with people who are incredibly negative and pull you down and basically ridicule you for the goals and hopes and dreams that you have? Or do you surround yourself with good people, and do you invest time in them? Your friends and family and people like that. Do you invest back in the people around you? Because when you're in a crisis, those are the people you need. And if you didn't invest in them before, usually it's very hard to build those relationships in the middle of a crisis or a life ambush. So it's very important that mine was really strong. And then the last one, of course, is spiritual leadership, putting time into those things that, whether it's religion, which is faith is a key part for me. But for others, I tell them, you just got to get outside yourself and understand that, you are not the center of the universe, and you are not an island. Your problems are not entirely unique. There are other people out there that not only have had exactly the same problem you have, but they've had it worse in spades. So understand that, and that gives you perspective to look at the world around you and say, okay, I can get outside of myself. Let me do some breathing exercise. Let me do some meditation. Let me clear my mind and understand that this problem I'm having is not the focal point of everything in my life. And if you can put time and effort in those 5 key areas, you will be so better balanced for any of the crisis, adversity, stresses that come along in your life. And it will make you such a better leader. It is the heart and soul of this idea of leading yourself.
Yep. I stand behind everything you just said, and the 5 points in that Pentagon of peak performance. The thing is, I think we need to be growing in every one of these. If a guy is lacking in one of these, he should be doing something to improve and to grow in that and take leadership of himself in that area. Because I think that when we're at our best is when we're fully integrated, every part of us. So of the 5 different things, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and all of these things socially, I think when we're integrated as people, I think that's when we're at our best. And whether, if we're leaders or just men trying to figure out, what to do in the next part of our life, I think that we have to accept leadership in these areas. And when we do so, then we can not just survive, we can thrive, because we would be fully integrated people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, Jay, I just want to say thank you so much again for your service, and thanks for coming on the show today. You've been just inspiring. Just your life message has inspired me and millions of others. Thank you for taking time in your busy schedule. I recommend that the guys go buy that book. And if you could pick up the book so they see the front of it, it's right behind you. There it is. That's the one. Go buy that book. It is a fantastic, fantastic read. You will not be disappointed. Again, thank you so much, Jay.
Chad, absolutely. And if you want your own signed copy, obviously you can go buy it at any of the main bookstores. I know a lot of people like ebooks. A lot of people like audiobooks, and I actually had the honor of reading my own audiobook for Overcome, and I've been getting amazing feedback on that. But if you would like your own signed hard copy, you can go to jasonredman.com. It'll take you to my store, which is on my getoffx.com coaching and consulting site. Make sure you're writing the notes. Hey, please personalize the book for Chad or Jason or whoever it is, and we'll get that done, and I'll get you a signed copy.
Awesome. Yep, guys, go do it. It's great stuff. Again, American hero. Thank you again, Jay.
Chad, thanks, man. Much appreciated.